Canada imposes tariffs of up to 250,270% on U.S. dairy products, but these high tariffs are often misunderstood by the public. While the numbers sound alarming, the reality is more complex. The tariffs only apply when the quantity of dairy imports exceeds a specific threshold called the tariff rate quota. This quota, however, is almost never exceeded. For years, U.S. dairy exports have stayed within these tariff-free limits, meaning the high tariffs are rarely, if ever, applied. President Donald Trump's repeated claims about Canada's high tariffs omit this crucial context, creating a misleading narrative that all U.S. dairy faces these steep charges. In practice, the tariffs only kick in after a certain amount of milk, yogurt, or powdered milk is imported. For example, if Canada allows the first 3 buckets of milk to enter tax-free, the 250% tariff only applies to the 4th. However, no company has imported enough dairy to reach this threshold in recent years, making the tariff a largely theoretical issue. Trump's portrayal of the situation stirs anger, but the reality is far from what is often communicated to the public. The tariff exists on paper, but it doesn't apply in practice for the vast majority of U.S. exports. The reason U.S. dairy isn't imported more is tied to the way the import quotas are distributed. Most of the quotas are allocated to Canadian dairy producers who have no incentive to import U.S. products, especially when they compete directly with domestic goods. For example, in 2023, only 12% of the quota for yogurt and buttermilk was used, leaving 88% unused. This issue has led to complaints from the U.S., arguing that Canada is unfairly restricting access to its market. However, Canada defends its quota system as a legal means of protecting its domestic agriculture under international trade agreements. Additionally, U.S. dairy products often contain RBST growth hormones, banned in Canada, further reducing the desire to import from the U.S. Though the dairy industry represents only 0.1% of the $700 billion in trade between the U.S. and Canada, it has become politically significant. Trump's focus on dairy products is part of a broader strategy to implement more aggressive trade policies. The proposed 20% global tariff on imports could severely impact the economy, potentially leading to a recession, higher unemployment, and reduced government tax revenue. This protectionist approach risks destabilizing the economy, as seen in past policies like the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which contributed to the Great Depression. The escalating trade tensions between the U.S. and its neighbors have far-reaching consequences. Negotiations between the U.S. and Mexico have been ongoing, as the U.S.-Mexico supply chain supports 14 million jobs in North America. Any disruption would affect not only factories but also labor markets, consumer spending, and investments. Meanwhile, Canada has activated its emergency response plan, marking one of the few instances of significant tension between the U.S. and Canada in recent decades. Trump's announcement of April 2 as Liberation Day, aimed at reasserting American power through tariffs, has sparked significant concern. While Wall Street initially reacted negatively, some economists fear the return of a policy reminiscent of the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which contributed to the Great Depression. Trump's approach involves imposing a 25% tariff on all cars not made in the U.S., disrupting the global auto supply chain. The automotive industry, which imports over 6 million vehicles annually, immediately saw stocks drop as a result. This policy extends to pharmaceuticals, with the U.S. heavily reliant on imported ingredients, particularly from China. Higher manufacturing costs could lead to higher drug prices, potentially impacting vulnerable groups like seniors and low-income patients. Despite this, Trump remains indifferent, stating that these issues will take care of themselves. Beyond tariffs, President Trump's inconsistent policy shifts have further contributed to economic instability. His recent statements, including mixed messages about energy policy and the environment, have raised concerns among investors and businesses. The risk of stagflation, rising inflation alongside falling economic growth, looms large, with some predicting a contraction in GDP. The economic uncertainty is exacerbated by Trump's erratic behavior, such as the fallout from comedian Chris Rock's satirical performance targeting the former president's financial failures and bizarre public moments. Rock's comedy, particularly his take on Trump's controversial actions like altering a hurricane map with a Sharpie, went viral, drawing public attention to Trump's fragile ego. This backlash, including Melania Trump's reaction, further intensified the media circus surrounding the Trump family. Amid all this, international trade partners, including Canada and the European Union, are growing increasingly concerned, with delayed investments and shifting trade dynamics signaling the potential beginning of a global realignment. Trump has just slapped a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, effective tomorrow, and the markets are in panic mode. Wall Street saw its worst day in months, with the Dow, S&P 500, and Nasdaq all plunging. Even Bitcoin nosedived by 8%. This move has sent shockwaves through the markets. Investors are fearing higher inflation, slower growth, and a potential recession. Prices on everyday goods like cars, phones, and groceries could skyrocket, hitting American consumers hard. But the chaos doesn't stop there. Both Canada and Mexico are retaliating with their own tariffs. Canada is targeting $155 billion in US goods, including cars and agricultural products. Mexico is also preparing mirror tariffs and forging new trade deals with China and Europe. And here's the kicker: Canada is America's largest oil supplier, providing crucial energy exports. If Canada tightens its energy supply, the US economy could be severely disrupted. The Canadian public is backing the government's response, and Canada is exploring new markets in Europe and Asia, which could weaken US trade dominance. If Trump's gamble backfires, American businesses and consumers could pay the price. A trade war may be brewing, and the economic fallout could be massive. Stay tuned.